At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, Richard Sterling's penthouse was silent, except for the faint rustle of papers and the scratching of a pen. Richard, one of the most feared and respected businessmen in New York, returned home earlier than usual that night. He expected to find his luxury apartment spotless, gleaming, and empty. Instead, he found something that left him frozen in shock. There, sitting on the marble floor of his private library, was his cleaner, 26-year-old Angela Carter. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hands smudged with dust, but her eyes were locked onto the thick textbooks spread out in front of her. She didn't notice him at first, too consumed by her studies. Richard's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "What the hell are you doing here?" Angela gasped, slamming the book shut. She scrambled to her feet, stammering, I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I just needed a quiet place to study." "Study?" Richard's tone was sharp, almost mocking. "You're paid to clean, not play schoolgirl in my house at night." Angela's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "I want to become a lawyer, sir. I can't afford college yet, but I study whenever I can, even if it's after scrubbing your floors." For a moment, Richard said nothing. He should have fired her on the spot, but something about the fire in her eyes unsettled him. That night marked the beginning of a battle neither of them expected, a battle of pride, ambition, and the cruel shadow of racism that still clung to the city. And by the time it ended, both of their lives would be changed forever. Richard Sterling stood motionless in the doorway of his private library, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the young woman who looked as though she had been caught trespassing in a sacred place. The scent of lemon polish still clung to the air, proof she had been cleaning, but now books were scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Angela Carter, his cleaner, looked up at him with the wide-eyed terror of someone who had been discovered in a forbidden act. Richard had spent his life building an empire where rules were law, where loyalty was bought with money, and obedience was demanded without question. And here was this girl, this cleaner, breaking the unspoken boundaries of his home. "I should fire you right now," he said coldly, stepping into the room. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor. "Do you have any idea how inappropriate this is?" Angela's hands trembled, but she didn't look away. "I know, sir. I wasn't trying to disrespect you. I just needed a quiet place to study." "Study?" Richard's tone was sharp, almost mocking. "You're paid to clean, not play schoolgirl in my house at night." Angela's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "I want to become a lawyer, sir. I can't afford college yet, but I study whenever I can, even if it's after scrubbing your floors." For a moment, Richard said nothing. He should have fired her on the spot, but something about the fire in her eyes unsettled him. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Richard studied her, trying to decide if she was naive or simply stubborn. Her skin glistened faintly with sweat, her dark hair pulled back in a bun, her uniform slightly too big, as though it had been borrowed or secondhand. She looked exhausted, yet her eyes burned with a quiet fire he hadn't seen in a long time. "You expect me to believe this?" Richard asked, finally, his voice lower now, less harsh. Angela hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir, because it's the truth." Richard turned away, pacing slowly around the room. He had built his fortune on deals, on reading people, on knowing when someone was bluffing. But Angela wasn't bluffing. He could feel it. The irony of the situation almost amused him. A cleaner, someone most people wouldn't notice, daring to dream of becoming a lawyer in his world of marble floors and glass towers. Still, he couldn't allow this breach of trust to slide. Rules were rules. "You're finished here," he said sharply. "Pack up your things in the morning. You won't step foot in this apartment again." The words hit Angela like a blow. Her face paled, but she didn't beg. She simply closed her textbook gently, as though handling something fragile, and whispered, "Yes, sir." Richard expected relief. Instead, he felt a strange heaviness. He left the library without another word, though sleep refused to come that night. Angela's voice echoed in his mind. "I want to be a lawyer. I have to keep pushing myself." The next morning, Angela arrived at Sterling Enterprises headquarters, her heart thundering in her chest. The glass towers stretched high into the sky, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. To her, the building looked more like a fortress than an office. She smoothed down her simple blouse and skirt, clothes borrowed from a friend, before stepping inside. The lobby was vast, filled with marble, chrome, and the hurried steps of executives. Angela felt out of place, like an imposter. At exactly 11 o'clock, she was escorted into Richard Sterling's office. He sat behind a massive oak desk, flipping through papers, every inch the image of power. "You're on time," he said, without looking up. "Good." Angela stood nervously, clutching her worn handbag. "Mr. Sterling, may I ask, why am I here?" Richard finally looked up, his blue eyes sharp. "You said you want to be a lawyer. You won't get there cleaning floors. But you can start by working here, as an assistant, filing, organizing documents, shadowing meetings. Nothing glamorous, but you'll learn." Angela blinked, stunned. You'd give me that chance?" Leaner turned assistant, she had earned quiet respect among some colleagues. A few began to ask her for help with research, and others nodded to her in the hallways. But not Thomas Green. His disdain only deepened. Behind closed doors, he began whispering in the ears of board members, feeding them doubts about Richard's judgment. "Sterling's gone soft," he told them. "He's gambling the company's reputation on a girl with no degree. If we let this continue, we'll all pay the price." Angela didn't know it, but a storm was brewing. One late evening, Angela was alone in the office organizing files. She came across a folder left on the conference table, marked Confidential. She hesitated, then picked it up to return it to the cabinet. But as she glanced at the first page, her eyes widened. It was a contract, one signed by Thomas himself, and it revealed a shocking truth. Thomas had been leaking company information to a competitor for months. The details were subtle, hidden in complex language, but Angela had read enough contracts to see it clearly. Her hands shook. If she brought this to Richard, Thomas could be ruined. But if she said nothing, Sterling Enterprises could lose millions, and Richard's trust in her would mean nothing. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest. The next morning, she walked into Richard's office, pale but determined. "Sir, I found something last night. You need to see this." Richard scanned the documents, his expression hardening with every line, his jaw clenched, and his blue eyes turned to ice. "Are you certain of this?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir. I double-checked. It's all there." Richard leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Leave this with me. And Angela, not a word to anyone. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." She left the office with her heart pounding. She didn't know what Richard would do, but she knew one thing. She had crossed a line from assistant to something far more dangerous. Richard moved quickly. Within days, Thomas was called into a private meeting with the board. Angela wasn't present, but whispers spread like wildfire through the office. By the end of the week, Thomas was gone, stripped of his position, his reputation in tatters. But Thomas wasn't finished. One morning, as Angela walked to work, she found herself blocked in the alley by none other than Thomas himself. His sharp suit was gone, replaced with disheveled clothes, his eyes filled with fury. "You think you've won. You ruined me. Me. Do you know who I am?" Angela's pulse raced, but she stood her ground. "You ruined yourself, Thomas. I only showed the truth." His face twisted. For a moment, she thought he might strike her, but then he spat on the ground and stormed away, his voice echoing, "You'll regret this. Mark my words." Shaken, Angela made it to the office, where Richard was waiting. He noticed her pale face immediately. "What happened?" he asked. When she told him, his expression darkened. "He won't touch you again. I'll make sure of it." Angela nodded, although fear lingered in her chest. Weeks passed, and things began to settle. Angela threw herself back into her work and her night classes. Slowly, she began to build a life that balanced both survival and ambition. Then came the day that would test her more than anything before. Sterling Enterprises was hit with a lawsuit, ironically from the same competitor Thomas had been feeding information to. The accusations were fierce: fraud, breach of contract, and unethical practices. If they lost, the company could collapse. Angela watched as Richard paced the boardroom, his usual calm replaced with a stormy intensity. "They think they can destroy me with lies," he said, his voice cold. "We'll fight, and we'll win." Angela wanted to help, but this time the stakes felt even higher. Not just millions of dollars, but Richard's entire empire, his name, his future. And, somewhere deep down, she wondered if this was Thomas's final revenge. The trial dragged on for weeks. Angela spent every spare moment poring over documents, searching for anything that could tip the scales. She studied until her eyes blurred, until exhaustion claimed her. One late night, she found it. A small discrepancy in the competitor's own filings. Hidden in the mountain of paperwork was evidence that they had fabricated numbers to strengthen their case. Her hands shook. She copied the pages and ran to Richard's office. "Sir, you need to see this. It proves they lied." Richard scanned the papers, and for the first time in days, a smile tugged at his lips. "Angela, you've just saved us." In court, the evidence shattered the competitor's case. The judge dismissed the lawsuit, ruling in Sterling Enterprises' favor. The company was safe, Richard's reputation untarnished. When the verdict was read, Angela sat in the back of the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. She had done it, not alone, but as part of something greater. Afterwards, Richard approached her, his usual icy demeanor softened. "You've proven yourself more times than I can count. You don't belong behind a mop. You belong here, in this world." Angela swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. But I still have a long way to go. I want to finish school. I want to become a real lawyer." Richard nodded. "And you will. I'll make sure of it." Years later, Angela Catter stood in a courtroom, not as a cleaner, not as an assistant, but as an attorney. Her first case was small, representing a tenant who had been cheated by a landlord. But as she rose to speak, her voice steady and strong, she felt the weight of her journey behind her. In the front row, Richard Sterling sat watching, his eyes filled with something rare: pride. Angela had come full circle. From scrubbing his floors to standing before a judge, she had fought through every wall, every prejudice, every doubt. And she knew this was only the beginning.